Lesson 13 Rook Mates, Zugzwang King Play. Part 1. Basic Checkmates. King and Rook versus Lone King. Concepts. King and Rook Play. More complex checkmate patterns. Introductions to opposition and Zugzwang, the concept of a waiting move. Step 1. The pattern. Rook checks from afar, king chases the knights, stars, white moves 1 kd3, a knight's check from the black king. Unlike the queen, lesson 4, part 1, the rook is unable to force the enemy king to the corner on its own. In this checkmate pattern, the king and rook will need to help each other every step of the way. The knight's move check pattern does continue, however, only this time our king is chasing the stars. The reason we move to d3 rather than e3, for example, is that it needs to be white's turn to move as soon as the kings take opposition, which means they are directly aligned. See lesson 14 for more on opposition. Example. If black were to play 1 kd5, the kings would be opposed, and white would immediately play 2 raw 5, forcing the king to retreat one step closer to the back rank. The unavoidable opposition check 1 kf5, 2 k3, kg5, 3 kf3, kh5, 4 kg3 and 4 kg5. Notice that even with his best running shoes on, the black king is unable to avoid opposition. Eventually, the kings do line up, which is the perfect, and only, time to give check. After 5 raw 5, the black king must retreat and move one rank closer to the back row. This pattern of keeping the rook at a distance, chasing the opposition with your king, and only delivering check when the king will have to retreat, meaning only when the kings are directly opposed, is an unstoppable plan. Black only possesses one final trick that white can easily stop. Copyright, ChessKid.com, page 1 of 9. Lesson 13. Step 2. Stay on the same rank, and don't forget to wait after 5 raw 5 kf6 6 kg4 k6 7 kf4 kd6 8 k4 kc6 9 kd4 and 9 kb6. Eventually, we reach a position where the black king, playing the best possible moves, is attacking our rook. We must stop our king chase for the moment and find a safe place for the rook, otherwise the rook will be captured. By transferring the rook to the opposite side of the board, staying on the 5th rank, we are putting as much space as possible between our rook and the black king. After 10 rh5 or g5, 10 kc6, we must be careful before making the mistake of 11 kc4, which would allow the black king to, once again, travel to the other side of the board and attack our rook with 11 kd6. We make one simple waiting move. Step 3. The waiting move. After 10 rh5 kd6, white should play the waiting move 11 rg5. By sliding the rook over one square, we have made a waiting move and thereby placed black in Zugzwang, which means that black doesn't want to move. See part 2. Now black's choices are either to run away to b6, delaying the inevitable, move to d6, allowing the immediate 12 rg6, or voluntarily retreat the king to the 7th rank, which also allows rg6, cutting off the 6th rank. After 11 kb6, 12 kc4, cos6, 13 kb4, kb6 and 14 rg6, it is clear that we have a repeating pattern. Chase the king. Give check only after opposition is achieved. And remember to swing the rook and make a waiting move. Making waiting moves repeats in the critical moment. Step 3. Reach the back rank, and finish the job after obvious moves. The above position is likely. Here we see a position offering a perfect example of the final sequence of moves. White, once again, should swing the rook to the far side of the board, 7th rank. After kf8, white can play the final waiting move, either raw 7 or rb7, and the black king will be checkmated within 3 moves. 1 kg8, 2 kf6, kh8, 3 kg6, kg8, 4 raw 8 b8. Like all good checkmate patterns, this technique works regardless of the opponent's willingness to cooperate. However, if black did not have to move, white would never be able to corner the king. This situation is known as Zugzwang. For more on Zugzwang, proceed to part 2. Copyright, ChessKid.com, page 2 of 9. Lesson 13 Rook Mates, Zugzwang King Play. Part 2. Zugzwang explained and examples. Concepts. Definition and examples of Zugzwang. Tricky combinations and Zugzwang tactical motifs. Zugzwang. A German word meaning move need, literally translated as move compulsion. This is a situation where every move a player could make causes him/her to lose, or at least worsens their position. Zugzwang example 1. Black is in Zugzwang, with every possible move being a bad one. If either player had the ability to pass their turn at will, only moving when it was convenient, numerous positions in chess would become stuck, reaching a figurative stalemate. In our first diagram we see a perfect follow-up example to our previous lesson, part 1, lesson 13. You can see that if black could pass the turn in this position and white were forced to move again following the last move, 1kc6 with 2kb6 for example, black would escape after 2kb6 with 2kc8, and run to the other side of the board, waiting to pass again at just the right moment. If black could continue this pattern of only moving when he/she wanted to, the game would never end. Zugzwang example 2. Black played 1rb1. Black's last move pinned the f1 bishop, meaning the bishop is attacked but can't move, see lesson 10, to the king on g1. Black's move effectively ends the game, and here's why. White has no choice but to move to kh1, allowing the immediate 2rx f1. This is a perfect example of zugzwang, as white's only legal move is losing on the spot, yet if a player could pass the turn, white's king remain perfectly safe, forever shielded by the pinned bishop on f1. Therefore the game would never end. Copyright, ChessKid.com, page 3 of 9. Lesson 13. Zugzwang example 3. Paul Morphy, 1840s. In this famous position, white plays 1 raw6, sacrificing the rook but immediately placing black in zugzwang. Though it may not be the most practical example, it is a classic idea, and one that is repeated in a large number of chess puzzle books. If 1 xo6, then 2 b7, and if 1 b on b8 moves anywhere, then 2 xo7 is checkmate. The imaginary or composed nature of this position shows the power of playing forcing moves and leaving the opponent with no good options. Zugzwang. Again we see that if black could pass, the beauty of Morphy's idea would be lost, or perhaps would have never existed. Zugzwang example 4. White's last move was 1kc2. Zugzwang. Here we see that black's king is almost stalemated. Black's only move in our current diagram is 1g5. White then plays 2hxg5, and this leads to a series of forced moves, with black knowingly walking to his own doom. After 2hxg5 h4 3g6 h3 4g7 h2 5g8 queen h1 queen and 6q g7 checkmate. Though the first position is the most critical, you could argue that black was in zugzwang for 6 moves in a row, with no way of escaping the ensuing checkmate along the a1 h8 diagonal. Black continues to make the only moves, knowing that the position is lost. Zugzwang example 5. Here white has just played 1g7, forcing black to the h7 square. Our final example shows the commonly reached climax of a basic king and pawn versus king ending, lessons 14 and 15, in which white achieved the goal of eventually forcing his opponent to give up control of the all-important promoting queening square, g8. After black's only legal move, 1kh7, white plays 2kf7 and promotes the g-pawn on the next move, easily winning in the king and queen versus king ending, lesson 4, part 1. If black could just pass the turn, black would never have to surrender the g8 or f7 squares. As you can see, a position where one player is in zugzwang can end the game quickly. Copyright, ChessKid.com, page 4 of 9. Lesson 13. Rook mates, zugzwang king play. Part 3. King play, king power, and king activity. Concepts. King play, when to be aggressive and when to play it safe with the king. King power and domination over other short-range pieces, knights and pawns. King activity in the endgame and other basic endgame ideas. When not to use your king, play it safe. Example 1. 1e4 e5 2q h5 and 2k e7. 3qx h5. The king's role is an important one, both when we are using him and when we are not using him. Because losing the king immediately results in the loss of the game, keeping him safe is always priority 1. Generally the opening stage of the game is the worst time to play with your king, so keep the big guy home. As we saw in lesson 7 part 1, this is an extreme example of what happens when the king decides to lead his army. In this 3-move checkmate, black has just played 2k8 e7, allowing 3q h5 z5 with checkmate. Black should have developed his other pieces, keeping the king safe. When not to use your king, play it safe. Example 2. Position reached from the fried liver attack after 12r1 and 12k d6. Those specific openings are not relevant for this concept to be understood. Here we see an example from a famous opening, the fried liver attack. This position clearly displays the problem with sacrificing the development of your pieces and displacing your king for the sake of material. Black's 2-piece advantage is, amazingly, not enough to safeguard the king or save the game. Here white can play a number of moves that led to a significant advantage and the eventual winning of material. However, the most forcing line of play is 13bx d5 cx b2 14k b1, avoiding any threats from black, 14cx d5 15 x7 x7 and 16 rx d5. winning the queen on d8 and likely checkmating the black king shortly thereafter. Copyright ChessKid.com, page 5 of 9. Lesson 13. King Power and Square Control. Example 1. Here we see two examples of the power of the king. After seeing two examples of why we don't want to use our king too early in the game, we move on to our first position designed to display the king's power. Many players do not realize that only one other piece besides the queen controls every square directly surrounding its current position, the king. In our third diagram we see two examples of the king's power. Firstly, standing alone in the middle of the open board, the white king controls a total of 8 squares. Second, as mentioned above, the king's ability to control every square directly surrounding it gives the king power over other short-range pieces, such as knights and pawns. The knight is trapped on 8 and the pawns can't help. King power and square control. Example 2. White to play and win. In the current position, white can trap the black knight on h1 with the correct move. Though we don't normally think of our king as an aggressive, fighting or powerful piece, it is important to know that the king is capable of great things. After 1 kf3, the white king is controlling both the f2 and g3 squares, thus preventing the black knight from escaping the corner. Regardless of black's response, white will play 2 kg2 next, attacking the trapped piece and winning it in just one more turn. Black should never have put his knight on the rim. See lesson 19 for more information on that. King power and square control. Rare aggressiveness with the king. Example 3. White to play in the game 1-0 short. N. Timon, J. Tilburg 1991. Using your king when the enemy queen is still in play is risky, and though we don't normally think of using our king when there are still so many dangerous pieces on the board, as we see from this legendary game, there can be exceptions to this rule. White to play and win. In this famous position, English Grandmaster Nigel Short played the move 33 kf4. Followed that with 34 kg5, and before he could even reach the h6 square, protecting the queen for giving checkmate on g7, his opponent, Grandmaster Jan Timon, resigned. Wow, what an incredibly powerful king. Copyright ChessKid.com, page 6 of 9. Lesson 13. King play in the endgame. Activating the king. Example 1. With an active king, white is winning. The endgame is considered to be the final stage of a chess game. Generally, we are considered to have reached the endgame stage when the queens have been traded and only a few pieces remain. In equal, or close to equal, endgames the king's value is very high, and playing actively with the king is an absolute must. Here, because of the active and central position, meaning the middle of the board, of the king on d5, white is winning regardless of whose turn it is to move. Now even if it were black to play and black chooses 1 kx-b4, the white king will go to e5, f6, and start capturing black's pawns. King play in the endgame. Activating the king. Example 2. After 1 kx-b4, 2 k5, kc4, 3 kf6, kd4, 4 kxf7, k4, 5 kg7, kxf4 and 6 kg7. The current position is reached assuming the best line of play following the original position in example 1. As we can see, white's more active and better placed king leads to a position where black's king is one move tempo behind the white king in their race to the kingside pawns. Black's position is losing by force. Black continues with 6 kg4 and the game follows the logical line of 7 kxh7, kxh4 and 8 kxg6. Effectively ending the game as white's king not only protects his g5 pawn, but will soon clear the way for the pawn to advance up the g file where it will promote to a queen. An active king alone can win an otherwise equal endgame. King play in the endgame. Activating the king. Example 3. With a passive king, white is losing. The opposite of the active and centralized king, example 1, is the passive and slow king. Everything from this position is the same as our first example except the position of white's king. This should display the final instructive point of lesson 13. In an equal endgame, a passive king alone can lose someone the game. Even with white to play, we see the following line. Note white's king is unable to challenge black's march to the kingside pawns. 1 kb 2 kx b4 2 kc 2 kc4 3 kd 2 kd4 4 k 2 k4 5 kf 2 kxf4 6 kg 2 kg4 7 kh 2 kxh4 followed by kxg5 with an easily winning position for black. Copyright ChessKid.com, page 7 of 9. Lesson 13. Rook mates. Zugzwang king play. Instructor's guide. When teaching the advanced concepts of the king and rook checkmate, zugzwang and king power activity, it is very important for the instructor to move slowly through each example, not jumping to the next position or concept until the teacher is sure each student fully understands the idea. It's vital that each child begins to see the patterns in every lesson. Chess is a game of pattern recognition in many ways. Therefore, moving on to a harder position without proper knowledge of the more basic version of the same concept is going to become increasingly more difficult as students progress. Chess study follows a logical step-by-step path that requires a player to be prepared for the potential next phase or position. So, without the fundamental understanding of those basic positions, a player will find herself consistently miscalculating and misevaluating their wants and needs during real games. In short, go slow. Practical notes and advice. Lesson 13. Displaying the repeating concept of the knight's move check pattern, first learned in Lesson 4, Part 1, can help a student quickly master the king and rook checkmate, Part 1. A creative way to illustrate zugzwang is to point out that in other board games a player can lose a turn or go to jail as punishment. However, in chess your turn must rotate, as otherwise positions like example 1 would be unwinnable. Essentially, zugzwang prevents players from moving only when they feel like it. This may help them realize another area that makes chess different, Part 2. To further illustrate the power of the king and the importance of king activity in the endgame, revisit Lesson 13 Mini-Game, Part 3, Pawn Wars. Add a king, add a knight without a king, etc. To show the power of king as a fighting piece. Copyright, ChessKid.com, page 8 of 9. Lesson 13 King Play Practice Games. Level 1. PPPPPPPK versus PPPPPPPP. Level 2. PPPPPPPNK versus PPPPPPPN. Level 3. PPPPPPPBK versus PPPPPPPB. Level 4. PPPPPPPRK versus PPPPPPPR. Level 5. PPPPPPPQK versus PPPPPPPQ. Rules. Goal. First player to promote, reach either the 1st or 8th rank with a pawn, wins. Teaching tips. Additional levels may be added, as long as the repeating pattern of one side, black or white, playing with a king against a kingless opponent continues. However, it is not recommended to move on to a more complicated level until both students have easily won playing with the extra king. Remind your students that using your extra piece, the king, and activating him early is usually a good idea when there are no queens on the board, reinforcing good endgame principles. Levels 1-4. One way to realize an extra piece advantage is to make trades. It will be easier for the king to dominate the pawns after trading off the pieces, knight for knight, bishop for bishop, etc. Levels 2-5. Copyright, ChessKid.com, page 9 of 9.